Welcome to another edition of California Triathlon Soup. This is Tom Richmond, and today I am with Hootie Hutmacher, who's the brand manager of Lifetime Triathlon, not Lifetime Fitness. Hi, Hootie.
Hi, Tom.
Well, welcome to California Triathlon Soup, where we like to have two parts triathlon, one part other stuff, and put a little sprinkle of fun in there. So I had the joy of knowing Lifetime Tri and you for quite a few years, but for many of the folks that listen, maybe Lifetime is something that they don't know about. So I would love, maybe we could start off by just talking about the Lifetime Tri Series in 2019. What's new?
So thanks for the discussion. It's always good to take a couple of minutes while we have some downtime in the winter and just think again. If I may, I'll step back a hot second here and just kind of address who Lifetime is. We are the Lifetime Fitness, a series of health clubs and indoor country clubs, basically. There are 140 clubs that we have nationwide now, from the West Coast to the East Coast and even in points in Canada. So the company's been around for about 25 years, and around 12 years ago, our CEO, Bahram Akradi, who is an endurance junkie himself, he's an avid triathlete, definitely an endurance cyclist, wanted to start sponsoring and then eventually started buying a lot of very top-tiered, prestigious events that happened across different channels here in the endurance space. So running events, cycling events, especially in the Leadville community, Dirty Kansas now, the big gravel bike competition in Kansas is part of our portfolio, as well as an 8-race series in the triathlon space. And that's my specific forte.
You know, I've had a chance to race Oceanside a couple years ago, and it was a well done race, and it was Olympic distance. And that was the year that fog rolled in. I think I was wave 7, and it was thick as pea soup. And I got out of the water and I said, where are all the other waves? And I think many of those athletes were held. You guys did a great job relative to safety. And it was just a wonderful event, lots of pros. And I just shook my head. I said, I don't know how they do this. I don't know how they do this at the quality that they do this. Operationally, how do you guys work nationally with your 8 races?
You know, that's a great question, and thank you for that testament. It is a lot to produce a race and to do it to a certain caliber. And that's our brand. That is the Lifetime universe, that we are a value-add brand. We typically don't compete on price. I don't think many people can anymore in the triathlon space. But the majority of our staff are both athletes as well as passion players in the sport. So as far as the production goes, we have a team of internal full-timers, almost 40 of us, who do nothing but produce these events, from Miami Marathon coming up in a few weeks to the Chicago Triathlon to, again, the Leadville series up in Colorado, and even some West Coast teammates there in the Tempe office. Produce our Tempe Tri and what was Oceanside, which we decided not to bring back after a couple of years. It's a really unique place to work and to kind of explore our own internal passions. We're fortunate, Tom, and I guess we're happy to see where this thing might keep going after so many years in the business.
Well, it'll surprise most people, but you're being modest. How many people did you have race at Chicago last year? How many people did you have to race in July in New York?
We do produce some big events. We produce triathlons in top-tier cities, so Chicago and New York are our standouts. Chicago, collectively, we were just under 10,000 collective athletes. That's spread across adults and kids alike. New York City, we had around 4,500 racing there in the Hudson. So this is the anomaly in short course triathlon. We're not really where the sport began, but by hosting these events in top-tier major cities in the heart of these urban areas, we provide an experience for our athletes that's unparalleled. And quite simply, a lot of these events have been grandfathered. They've been around for 30 to 35 years. And I don't think in a lot of cases companies are able to do that anymore. The disruption to the community and just the politics of getting events produced both in rural and in urban locations, it's a little bit more of a challenge year over year.
So Miami, Austin, Minneapolis, New York, Chicago, Tempe, and then again back in Miami at the end of the year. That's what your 2019 looks like.
It is. Yeah, we're repeating our same schedule from last year. We trimmed a couple of smaller events over the past 2 or 3 seasons, redefining what our portfolio looks like, and that's top-tier destination cities. We're starting to make a little bit of a move, very much like an Ironman program, I guess, where we want some of our athletes to start building some travel plans and putting some legacy and some cross-promotional programming out there to get these guys to travel to New York City and then hit to Chicago and then to Miami in the course of one season. We don't think that's a far stretch because we have some amazing properties, and we think once they taste one of our events in a market, they'll be curious of what some of our other ones look like.
Yeah, I was up a year or two ago in New York, and obviously it was a well-run race, but in New York you would think that it would get lost, and it didn't. It was prominent.
Again, we're very fortunate that how some of these events first came to be were very political savvy environments. The New York City Triathlon was a testament to New York when they were bidding for the 2012 Olympic Games. And they wanted to challenge themselves to host a triathlon in the middle of the city without disrupting the city. And they did it. Swimming there in the Hudson on the west side, transition in Riverside Park, biking down the West Side Highway, running down 72nd Street, doing a loop around Central Park. The same course we have to date is exactly what they did back in 2001 for the first time. Each of our events, again, having the history of 20 to 35 years in some capacities, those are testaments to us finding a pretty good balance, or our predecessors finding a really good balance of how to bring multisport mainstream and how to balance the needs of the city continuing to operate where each of our races are held.
You mentioned bringing it mainstream, and obviously that means bringing in first timers, beginners, which is in some cases, it can be expensive to do all that outreach. I know that's a focus for you. What percentage of your athletes are first timers?
So last year, just about 25% of our collective athletes, just over 22, almost 23,000 athletes, 25% on average were first-time outdoor triathletes. And I guess back to your first question several minutes ago, we need to figure out some new ways to shake up the space. And to do exactly what you guys do at Cal Tri, we know the sport needs to be more affordable, more accessible, more sustainable. And the new audiences, the millennials, so to say, it's a big question mark on how do we really drive interest and passion into that audience because they're not familiar with the sport, let alone the inconvenience and some of the expense tied in behind it. So that's been part of our initiative in the past year and a half, is to really figure out, with trying to maintain the integrity of what triathlon is, swim, bike, run, what else can we do that shakes up the traditional, very rigid structure of our sport? So simplifying processes, enhancing accessibility, offering first-timer friendly race experiences, giving an individualized taste or a triathlon on your own terms. It's really tough to do that in a very structured window of time to get all these people through a different process that might have a little bit of a different feel from one group to another, but we know our road closures and our permits are still a very fixed timeline. So that's been a challenge, is to figure out how this all fits together without confusing the masses, but giving these guys something that they're really looking for. They don't care about podiuming. They care more about, surviving the swim and then crossing the finish line eventually. That's where we're really figuring out, how do we keep these people compelled as goals change over the course of their lifestyles? Let's continue throwing them an opportunity that they know they can chase.
And not only do you have, obviously you appeal to the first timers, but for the veterans and the folks that, so for instance, let's go through an experience of saying that somebody on our team is going to go to Austin first in their age group. Don't you have them come to New York? Is there a championship event? Don't you do things like maybe even ship their bicycle or something?
We do, yeah. This is one of our plays of what we've been really trying to figure out, how to engage our veteran triathletes, especially the diehards, the aficionados who really want to be out there to test themselves and to see where they end up in competition. So it's kind of a fun factor at the same time that we've really tapped into. Our Oceanside race was the end of our season historically. That was held back in October, and it was the culmination of a true calendar year schedule. Now, with our pro purse having gone away, we were really focused on amateur athletes and knowing exactly what I was mentioning, the fact that you can race in some incredible urban destinations. We position New York City as something that for many, many years, so many of us short course triathletes just never thought about racing. It had been a lottery. This past year in 2018, we changed the format a little bit, so New York City became a general entry. But at the same time, we used New York City as leverage for our competitive age groupers to qualify and come in for a world-class experience. We gave away a $60,000 prize purse to age groupers. So we hosted a race within a race. Those who raced the previous 7 events, the top 3 in each competitive age group, then qualified for this special championship slot. The special experience in New York City, of which Tri-Bike Transport shipped their bikes for free. So immediately we had an ability for the hassles of traveling for a short course triathlon. That was taken away. We found a barrier breaker right there through a great partnership with TBT. And, we had 225 athletes race that with us. So, happy to say that we're back. We're recommitted to New York City being our championship event in 2019. And we've got 2 more races in the circuit that will qualify those who are out there who want to make it to New York City. So South Beach in April, Captex again in May on Memorial Day, and then the big race in New York City on July 21st.
So the Minnesota race 8 days prior, that's not for this year. It's just too short of a turnaround, correct?
Yeah, correct. It's a little bit of a challenge with New York City because unlike fixed dates, which most of our events are held under, New York City, we have to play with the river. The Hudson's a tidal river. We have to find a Sunday between 6 and 9 o'clock a.m. nominally, where the current is always going southbound. It's a point-to-point swim. So, without changing the structure or the venue too much, that's why the date fluctuates, anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks in the course of the summer.
There's been some pretty fast swim times in New York, yeah?
There have. I don't know what the current record is, but it's under 10 minutes easily.
That's awesome. I might even be able to finish in time. That's awesome.
That volume of water, I think, typically flows at high tide around 2 to 3 knots. And so you are motorboating straight down that river. You can't beat that experience. And, again, for those who are so terrified by the idea of the swim, and terrified by the idea of swimming in the Hudson, which is a completely great experience for whatever that's worth. It's the fastest swim of their lives. And the amount of smiles you see come out of the New York City race, pound for pound, they far exceed any of other races in our series.
So, I'll go to an announcement, I guess, back in July of 2017, maybe, where you guys made changes, big changes. And we just started 2019, but you made industry shaping changes in the summer of 2017. Can you cover that? What was the background on that? What are some of the major changes? And now that you have, say, a full season, 2018, under your belt, what were the impacts of some of those changes?
So leading up to that, and I guess this is 2016 and early 2017 before we made any of these announcements and really set our course of action. Like most of us in the triathlon space, we're concerned. We still have concerns, but we wanted to get out ahead of it and try to figure out where the market is heading and getting away from this idea of having a cookie cutter race experience and just continuing year over year with the same standards. We knew that our age groupers were aging up. Our typical athlete was growing at least 1 year, if not two, for the past 2 or 3 years prior to that. Newbies were really slowing down. There wasn't a lot of steam to get them back in the space, and we weren't doing a good job of being competitive within the marketplace. So we knew that we had to initiate a couple of changes, and we really boiled that down to, I think, 3 or 4 bullet points. The sport is complex, so we wanted to figure out ways to simplify that, especially from an educational standpoint for newcomers. We wanted to increase the accessibility, and that really came through a race experience with lowered barriers to entry, and especially keeping the first-timers away from the competitive athletes, like giving them their own space and giving them their own race experience. We wanted to find ways to make it a little bit more convenient, and that comes in waiting to start. You check in your bike and transition, and some of our bigger races, you might have waited 2 to 3 hours before you ever got in the water. That's just a drag. And then we also wanted to rekindle the fun factor, like I had mentioned. So just doing things a little bit differently that some of our athletes haven't seen over the past couple of years or even in their triathlon experience. Those are the 4 bullet points there, but I guess the biggest one was really how can we produce these events in an environment that just makes a little bit more sense to our athletes? And we did make the decision there to change, first and foremost, our pricing structure and our insurance programming. We got rid of the typical online fees that are associated with coming to register for an event, which you might be talking 6 to 7%. We absorbed those into our current pricing. And then we also decided to, because we work under a huge corporation through the Lifetime name, we were able to figure out how to cover general liability insurance and athlete insurance in the same capacity of what USAT offered through their programming at much less of a cost. And the cost was so negligible that we just decided to also bake that into our fees. So that gave us an ability to think differently with not having to abide by the typical structures or programming under USA Triathlon. That gave us some flexibility to think, what else can we do that's not in this wheelhouse that will just further the thought of making the sport simpler, better, faster, stronger. So that was the catalyst.
So from a pricing point of view, I'm looking at your website and the opening price for, say, South Beach in April was $169. So that includes the race registration and that includes any insurance. It's all in that.
That's correct. One price shopping. And we continue with our typical pricing models. We have price increases or we have pricing tiers in certain markets as well. We hope to expedite more people, especially the price conscious, to come in earlier. That just helps everybody out to get ahead of the cash flow.
Do you have relays? Does Lifetime Tri do relays?
Every one of our events, absolutely. And we even get into offering relays for super sprint athletes, those who want to do just half of the sprint distance where we have those events. Because again, if someone wants to come and touch triathlon, we don't want to have a reason as far as why they shouldn't or why they can't.
Yeah, and we've had, it's no secret that California Triathlon has CalTri events and a series of races in Southern California in LA Orange, Ventura counties. And we really struggled with the same things that you've struggled with relative to bringing new people in the sport. So, for instance, we would have a sprint relay and they would come in as a sprint relay. And then we'd have to tell them, hey, the fee for a sprint relay is $60, really affordable. Just let's get you in the sport. And so each one would split it up 20, and then we would have to tell them that the insurance, the USA Triathlon insurance, was 15 each for a one-day insurance, and we just would lose people right there. And so for this year, upcoming year 2019, we have a different insurance carrier, and it's allowed us to do things like have not only good relays, which are cost effective, but also swim, bike, swim, run, and those single sport and double sport athletes, they don't have that extra charge, which keeps them away. And I sent a note out to 2,700 people who had done any of our races. It's funny that you mentioned numbers like 10,000. We're talking 2,700. It's pretty small. But I didn't get one negative response about our change of insurance carrier. Have you guys gotten feedback in 2018 about that?
In general, I would say 99.999% of our athletes are completely comfortable and supportive of the decision that we had made. We do realize that we're no longer qualifying events for the championship programming that USA Triathlon offers, and that's unfortunate, but it's the right decision at this moment. And I always want to justify this. Like, we have no ill will, no animosity towards USA Triathlon. We absolutely love and appreciate what those guys do for our sport, and we want to contribute to growing the sport collectively. But as far as the sanctioning process goes, which is really driven by the insurance programming, it wasn't a good business decision for us.
So what rules and then what officials do you use?
In alignment with us having the ability to think differently and really produce our events to a different standard, we developed our own officiating program from scratch. An amazing colleague, Rosalind Popham, who was my first triathlon coach nearly 20 years ago, we basically consulted with her and she hired a team. 8 race officials who did nothing but travel our events. They were at every one of our events over this past season, and they're going to come back this coming year, which is even great. They built a rules program from top to bottom that really encompasses the scope of what we were trying to change, making the sport a little bit more simple, having a modified version of rules for the first timers to try to make it a little bit more accessible, more appealing to them, and adopting some of the principles that seem to work across the industry. So, case in point is the penalty process that Ironman and that ITU offer. There is a stand-down portion when you are assessed a penalty that the official will have a conversation with you to help educate you on what happened, direct you to a penalty tent, and you serve your time there. There's no longer a need to add extra time or have these surprises that came in after the fact. That was always tricky for us to have issues and errors with our awards programming, to have a customer service challenge or question with an athlete. We can't address what had happened, so we have to defer them to USA Triathlon. So again, the whole educational process of trying to be more friendly and more forward with all of our athletes and our competitors, that's the scope and the focus of this. And I know it's almost impossible to measure some of this, but I can tell you, I would bet we helped to avoid more than, I would say, 600 to 700 penalties by our officials being at the end of T2 and telling athletes, hey, take off those headphones, you can't have those on the run course. And getting ahead of them by just having the conversation and educating them in motion, which is a huge opportunity for us to keep enhancing next year.
Does that include things like WADA and doping?
We still have a relationship with USAT, with a pro race that still is held in New York City. They were part of our programming this past year. And because of our prize purse that was associated to the age group competition there in New York City as well, that was all baked together. And where we do continue to expand, which we hope to in the next season or two, to have a larger pro purse and a larger amateur purse that we'll do, we will bring in those groups accordingly.
Got it. Well, part of the nice thing about California Triathlon Soup is there's actually only, we joke about it, there's probably at least 10 or 12 people that listen to it, which is great. So it's fun to kind of put on and have a good conversation. We've talked triathlon for a few minutes and now maybe a little non-triathlon. So the question always is, how can you tell if you're having lunch with a triathlete? And the joke is you don't have to ask, they'll tell you. So my question to you is non-triathlon. What's Hootie doing non-triathlon relative to, family fun, all that good stuff, all downtime?
Honestly, I don't do a lot outside of the triathlon space. It's really interesting to come into a business that is your passion play It's probably very unhealthy, Tom, but for the past 7 years, I've done very little outside of this world.
Not even like, any Netflix binge watching? Never?
I haven't gotten into that just yet. I had a subscription given to me a couple of years ago to do that, to be able to slow down my life and take a time out. And I've been so terrified of starting that process and getting sucked into it, I've just avoided it altogether. I will say this, though. Being a Chicagoan, being here in the winter in Chicago, my guilty pleasure was Chicago Bears game day. And, here we are a couple of days after the Bears just had a terrible ending to an amazing season. That's what's hot and heavy on all of our minds right now, including myself. I speak to you in my Bears orange and blue, and we're dreaming about next year already, Tom.
Yeah, I'm a Ravens fan, and we can't talk about that. It was a rough weekend. One of the things this week that I've been doing with folks, this is taped in the first week of January, is to kind of look at the end of the year and imagine it's December and say, what are the 3 things that you want to get done this year? And that doesn't mean work, it can mean everything. And then everything else is noise. I'm going to be 50 years old later on this year. And, I'm taking a bike ride with a group of friends from LA to San Francisco, June 22nd to the 26th.
Right on.
The first day or two of the trip, the triathlon team everybody's invited, certainly. And then a few of us, 16 of us, are going to head up to San Francisco. And that's something I wanted to do. I've never been able to do that, to go from LA to San Francisco. So check, that's on the list. We've got a family reunion. Check, that's on the list. Getting some of these new events launched in Southern California. Check, that's on the list. And then everything else is noise. So when you look at this year, and I know it took me a little bit of time to think of that. When you look at 2019 and you're looking, say, back on 2019, what are the 3 things that you're hoping for? And then what else is noise?
Are we going professional or personal here?
Anything. Like I said, there's like 10 people on this. If you've got any major announcements, you let me know. But
Well, I can tell you this. The first is to continue to find new ways that just innovate our space. We are worried. There's still a collective concern about the idea of swim, bike, run having a purpose in the future. And while maybe the same formats won't continue to make sense, multisport, maybe it's not triathlon, but the words multisport, I think is going to be something that we're really drilling into from the lifetime space. Swim runs, reverse triathlons, gravel triathlons. I know Dan Amfield is all over those right now. There are other event formats that we are going to start exploring and that you guys might see sometime in the near future. I won't commit to that tomorrow or the next 6 months, but we're doing our research right now. 2, personally, this kind of comes back to your previous question. I have found that I need time to kind of move away from the day-to-day and just relax and I guess recoup and reset the brain. So as we speak, I'm here researching flights to Ecuador, to South America, and back to Australia over the next course of the season. So got to find some time to time out and just kind of refresh. I'm definitely dating. I'm in the dating world. I've been out of a relationship for a couple of years now, and it's time to recommit to that as well, Tom. So 2019 is the year of the well-balanced man. I'm going to be the spokesperson, the poster child for that one.
Is 2019 the year to swipe right? Is that what you're saying?
If you can teach me what swiping is all about, then sure. But she's out there. She's out there.
I have a 14-year-old daughter, and I embarrass her quite a bit. So swiping right, it's cringeworthy for me to even say it. And I'll help you out with this too. Just make sure, boy, this podcast is really lit. Just use the word lit a lot around teenagers, and you're going to get so much street cred.
I'm going to need some support with that one.
Yeah, that's too funny. Well, hey, maybe we'll have you on the bike ride in June from LA to San Francisco. There's going to be some good folks on there. I want to go back a little bit to what you had mentioned about the state of the sport. And one of the words that I use that we've added in the last 2 years, and coming up with like a mission statement and a vision statement, is actually one of the hardest things, to take everything that you want to work on and boil it down into something that's short. It just takes a lot of work. I remember it took me 6 months and we finally settled on something that's affordable, accessible, and then 2 years later, sustainable. My preference for race distance is actually 70.3 mile distance, mainly because Olympic and 70.3, those are the distances because they're standard distances. And sometimes for me, for 70.3 over Olympic is because the swim is just a little bit more for the 70.3, whereas, the bike and run, it gets even more of a lion's share. But I love the distance of Olympic and half. And we've been tracking both WTC, Ironman, and we've been tracking grassroots for 3 or 4 years, each race, the number of finishers. And our data for 2018 for Ironman WTC was 5.5% less finishers in the 140.6 range, and then 10% less for the 70.3 range. And we published that on California Triathlon. We have all the finisher data. The reason we use finisher data versus registration data is the grassroots folks, it's really hard to get accurate registration data. So finisher data is, a lot easier to get.
Sure.
So when we start looking at that data, when I start doing channel checks with charities who say, hey, last year I had X number of people and this year I have Y number of people less. When I start looking at consolidation, we're really concerned about multisport. And I'll use Orange County as a great example. There were 3 races there last year, 2018. One was Escape. The second one was the Orange County Triathlon in June. And then there was our race, Newport Dunes, in November, which was a first-year race. And this year, Escape bailed out of the space, except for Escape for Alcatraz. So all the other races around the country are gone. And there'll be another race that opens in that market. But you have a county of 3.3 million people in Southern California with 3 triathlons. Something's wrong. So I'm glad that you guys are addressing it, especially with the word that sustainable. And what I find is a lot of people come in the sport, they want to get involved. They go straight from, I want to do a sprint to I want to go do long course. And then 2 years later, I don't see them again. There's just such a high, it becomes a bucket list. And I want to get people and keep people in the sport for, 5-10 years and keep them in and show them that it's a healthy, active lifestyle that they can participate. And then the other side of that, from the affordable and accessible point of view, is you look at the average household income around the country, and I think it's 60,000. I believe USA Triathlon has published something in the 130, 140. And if WTC or Ironman has published 247, that's top 2%. So you have to have a product where a lot of people can do it. Obviously, working with those cities, really important. Any thoughts about, if you were to think 3 to 5 years out, what are some of the changes you would think would happen in the next 3 years? Do you think the sport's going to continue flat or decline, or do you think it's going to head back up?
Oh boy, let's get the crystal ball out here.
Right?
I think a couple of things. As a race director, as a production group, the expenses continue to snowball a little bit more out of proportion. So especially permitting, police, a lot of your EMS services, there's not a linear growth that you see with a lot of those. There are some hockey stick effects happening at the moment. And I think most of our fellow race directors who are no longer in the business, that's what really seemed to do them in, raising these prices and having an unsustainable business model. I think a couple of things will happen as a result of that. Some of our events, and maybe some of the other competitors out there, maybe we'll see a format change in the courses. Maybe we'll see something more of an F1 style where you have still short course triathlon, but it's much more multi-loop to reduce your exposure there and total cost of all those services that you need. That's something that might be a little bit more realistic, as well as more events coming back to rural markets, getting off of urban environments where this continues to be a problem, especially as our culture starts to populate more of the urban environments and leave the rural space. That could be a nice little trend. And this is back to Dan Empfield. He believes that gravel triathlon has a really strong future, especially with some of the growth of the cycle community. So why not adopt to what already works for them?
I'm looking at the cycling community, and maybe I'm just fresh off a performance bike 104 store bankruptcy, Interbike shutting down, and I'm really questioning it appears that bikes in that whole market are on the number of bike stores, at least retail. I mean, obviously there's online, but I'll just put it this way. The bike industry does not make me hopeful that multisport's going to get better.
Yeah.
And I'll say one thing, the bike is the most expensive. It's probably the largest barrier to getting people involved. And that's why when we were looking at the relays so much, when we're looking, if you're going to do a sprint or a sprint relay or a swim bike or swim run or swimmer run, in 4 out of 6 of those cases, you actually don't need a bike. In the sprint relay, you can do a non-bike event. And I think that at least locally here I live in Virginia, we do a training session called Maria's. We named it for the wife of one of the professors. And, there's a track workout, there's some, runs across campus, different places. And then there's some stairs and then a big hill at the end. And we do repeats and people love it. They're basically spending 15, 20-minute intervals. Hey, I want to do 2, I want to do 3, I want to do 4. And everybody has a great time and they're getting all that value. And really it just cost a pair of shoes.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that, I start looking at Steve Tomboni in Indianapolis, who used to have 16 races as part of American Multisport, 16 triathlons. This year he'll have 0. And he's moved over to Viking Dash and running that brand and pushing that nationally with trail running. And in some cases, he'll say there's a permit. It was $100. To your point, people aren't going on the roads. They have a great time. And I think he just had 1,000 people come into Chicago. So for him, it's high participation, lower costs, less barrier to entry. And I think that if the powers to be in triathlon aren't watching that, the downward number of members is going to continue.
Yeah, it is alarming. The ideas of innovation haven't been in our space for quite a few years. Even the adoption of technology. Here we are as a technology company. We haven't solved that. How do we make it a little bit more appealing to the millennials or to some of the younger generation who live in this space?
And one of the things that's interesting for you guys is, speaking of technology, I don't think anybody would know this. Doesn't Lifetime own a registration business?
We do. We own the Chronotrack platform, as well as the Athlinks results algorithm, basically, the big database of all online endurance results.
So having Chronotrack, basically being able to integrate with Chronotrack and Athlinks, that's a significant benefit to create excitement.
It is, and we are an internal company, or we're an internal customer. So, as much as we want to have our way and be able to adopt this technology for our general purpose or specific use, our teams have to figure out that right balance of serving the customers, the paying customers at that level, as well as help us, identify new opportunities to bring this technology to life. I will say we have a couple things in the hopper that we hope to unveil pretty soon.
Any announcements?
Well, no announcements, but the idea of real-time recognition in the finish line,
yeah,
that's something that we should have had many years ago. And I think we're getting much closer to having that on a daily basis.
So if you set a personal PR or a race PR, that would flash up?
Exactly.
That's really cool.
American Ninja Warrior style, where there's confetti cannons and smoke screens and there's everything happening because we know what happened and we need to celebrate accordingly.
Relative to competition, I mean, you're producing these great events. You have 100 events. Obviously, the big triathlons you have. Is there much competition? Where do you see competition coming from?
It's really in other lifestyles. We don't seem to compete head to head with any fellow race producers in our markets. And the fact is most of our competition have gone away when you relate it to that level. So it's really an advocacy that we're trying to support to get people to consider the idea of multisport. And while triathlon, the term still resonates with so many people, and there's a lot of emotion that comes as a result of hearing that term. We don't want that to go away. You had mentioned with the Escape series basically leaving Philly and DC and some of these other major markets. That's our legitimate fear now, is that people won't even know what triathlon is in another 5 or 10 years. And we need to make our stand. We need to continue to create this advocacy and support education and athlete development. We are not in the race production world. We are athlete developers. We have to think that way.
Yes. And what we're looking to do is we don't really care how somebody, gets their sweat on. We definitely notice. I mean, I'll see athletes from a trend because we are athletes. And they'll do, maybe short course, then they go to long course. Next thing you know, they're trying to qualify for Boston. Then it's the trail. So it's Angeles Crest 100. It's Western States. It's endurance cycling. Oh, hey, I'm going to start doing double centuries. And especially in Southern California, where every weekend just has multiple events. This year, it's interesting. We have on April 7th, Viking Dash Trail Run Los Angeles in Griffith Park. It's got 3,000 feet of climbing it's brutal. 3,000 feet of climbing for the half, in Griffith Park. It's gorgeous. It's on the same day as 70.3 California Oceanside. That just is the way it is. And so, athletes have their choice. So when some of our athletes are like, hey, I'm going to be down at Oceanside, we're like, hey, wait a second. It's our first trail race in Los Angeles. It's amazing how new people are coming in through running, through cycling, through swimming, through master swim programs and things like that. And so we sort of, in some cases, you're absolutely right. I don't think race companies are necessarily competing with each other. I think they're competing to keep people in the sport for a long time. So we are in complete agreement. We really appreciate it. Look, we've been talking about doing this for, a year, ever since California Triathlon Soup was started. Very much appreciate everything that Lifetime does, has accomplished, the leadership position. We certainly wouldn't have potentially looked at other directions for our Southern California race series if we hadn't seen the success that Lifetime Tri had experienced. One last thing for anybody listening, or, good luck in 2019.
Yeah, for what it's worth, we certainly appreciate and we very much parallel what you guys believe, Tom, with Cal Tri, and again, just keeping the sport legitimate. So wherever this might go down the road, we know that those of us who remain in the space, we have to become a little bit closer and start to develop greater partnerships with our athletes, our staff, staff, and our communities in general. That's what will make or break our sport as the community that we have at large. So wherever we have these opportunities, and as much as we've spoken in the past here, I think we have some really cool things that will come forward in the future, maybe developing some bigger networks and partnerships and just keeping us prevalent.
This is California Triathlon Soup. We've been talking to Hootie Hutmacher from Lifetime, who you're either going to see at many of the Lifetime Tri races around the country, maybe Ecuador, maybe Australia. Ladies, if you get them early in the year, there might be opportunities. And again, thank you so much, Hootie, for joining California Triathlon Soup.